anyone comes in, I'll go ahead and let them in. So I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Alicia Van Enoo, and I am a pre-grad and PhD advisor at the UCSD Career Center. I'll be giving today's presentation on psychology graduate programs, and I'm really excited to be with you guys tonight. I wanted to give the opportunity for the leadership of the Psych-Hi organization to introduce themselves as we are running this event in collaboration. So if someone from Psych-Hi wants to take it over.
Thank you so much, Alicia. So as mentioned, we're Psych-Hi Psychology Club. Psych-Hi is an international honor society. Psychology Club is our inclusive counterpart. So for those of you that are our members, we will be dropping an attendance link in the chat sometime tonight so that you can get a point for joining the GBM. And if you're not a member, please come check us out. Thank you, Alicia.
Awesome, Amber. Thank you so much. So a little housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded. The reason why is because we like to post these kinds of events on our UCSD Career Center YouTube channel. So first of all, definitely if you're here and you want to reference it back, then you'll have the opportunity to do so by looking at the recording on YouTube. And then as far as the presentation, I'm actually going to share it with all of you at the end of tonight. So please don't take frantic notes. You're going to have access to this presentation, to these slides, and to all of its embedded links. So two of those things. And then the last thing I want to mention is that I will not be able to moderate or to look at the chat while we go. So if you have any questions, please hold them until the end. I promise I'll give ample time for questions. And then if there are any emergencies, then feel free to unmute yourself and speak up, and we can go over that. So without further ado, I will go ahead and get started. So I wanted to kind of jump right in and talk about the first question that I get from every student, and it kind of highlights the beginning of the grad school process. And it's, is grad school even the right choice for me? And I honestly think that that's probably the hardest question that you ask yourself, because it's at the very beginning, and it's probably where you have the least amount of information to go for. And bear with me, but the best way to answer whether grad school is right for you, which is the starting point of your journey, is to go to the end point of your journey and work backwards. So what I mean by that is that identifying your career endpoint is the first thing you should do before you kind of throw yourself into the grad school path. And identifying your career endpoint really consists of doing career exploration to determine which career is the right choice for you, and whether that career requires a graduate program, and if so, which one. And the reason why we want to do that is because what we don't want is for you to pursue a graduate degree in something that ultimately won't result in the career that's going to make you happy. It's going to be a waste of time. It might be a waste of money. And it will show in your graduate applications that you didn't fully think through whether you needed the degree to get to that endpoint. So how do I identify career endpoints? The first kind of line of attack is using broad assessments, things like Myers-Briggs, the ONET interest profiler. The Imagine PhD and my IDP are actually more focused towards PhD students, but I highly recommend checking them out as well, as they're a good starting point to find kind of target careers. And then there's this kind of career assessment that's specifically dedicated to mental health professions that I think your group will find particularly helpful. And then the next step is to conduct informational interviews. And informational interviews is broadly, it's meeting with people who are in careers, who have had career academic paths that you might be interested in finding more about. And the best way to find people to do informational interviews with is via LinkedIn and Trains Connect. We love to talk about how to do informational interviewing. So if you have more questions on that, please make an appointment via Handshake with one of our pre-grad advisors, either myself or Marcy Morrison, and we can discuss how to get your informational interviewing going. So with that, I wanted to kind of talk about, well, okay, what are some careers right now, some job titles that I could start thinking about? Because often that's kind of the hardest hurdle, is like, I have no idea what's even possible. And what I wanted to highlight was that although this presentation is geared towards discussing graduate school, there are many career paths that don't involve going to graduate school at all. And we always encourage students to really think about whether a graduate degree is required for the career that you want or not, because many times you can have a very successful and fulfilling career without ever needing to go to graduate school. So here's a list. It's on the psychology website from UCSD. I highly recommend checking it out, of various types of psychology related careers that you can have with just a bachelor's degree. Then we go on to the careers, some not comprehensive list of careers that would require an advanced degree. And broadly speaking, these careers fall in the broad categories of psychologist, therapist, research scientist, and counselor. So these are kind of careers that can get you started to think about, what can I do with a bachelor's? What could I do with an advanced degree? So speaking of advanced degrees, I wanted to start by talking about master's degrees, and then we'll go on and talk about doctoral degrees. So a question that I commonly get is, I want to do a master's, but I don't know how to find them because I don't know what they're called. And that's because master's degrees in psychology have so many different names. And the list that's here is not by any means a comprehensive list of the names of master's degrees, but it does cover a lot of them. And so I wanted to provide that list for you guys to have an idea of, if you're doing a Google search or just trying to get a broad idea of like what's even available, these terms might help you find programs. And then I wanted to go through the licensure that is associated with a lot of these programs. So when we talk about licensure, we're talking about the ability to practice as either a therapist or a behavioral analyst. There are many different types of licensures available, and the licenses vary state by state and definitely country by country. So the ones that are listed here, again, not a comprehensive list, but an example. The most popular licenses that people will get to practice as therapists will be LPCs, licensed marriage and family therapist certification, licensed clinical social worker certification, and then of course the certification for behavioral analyst. In general, master's degrees in cost are similar to undergraduate degrees. There's some financial aid, but it's pretty limited. Additionally, it varies widely based on whether you're in a public school, private school, in-state, out of state. On average, it takes about 2 years. There are some programs that are accelerated, either 12 months or 18 months, but I'd count for about 2 years. And the good news, and I wanted to start off with that, is that the acceptance rate for master's degrees are actually quite high. Now, these statistics change all the time, year for year, and they vary extremely widely based on the program in the school that you're selecting. So I wouldn't assume that every master's program at every school is going to have an acceptance rate that's like this. But on average, if we were to take to the average of all psychology master's programs, this is about the acceptance rate. So moving on to doctoral degrees. Now, there are really kind of 3 broad categories of doctoral degrees that are available in the psychology field. And these degrees fall on a spectrum, and they're based on kind of 2 different models. And these models are either the practitioner model or the scientist model. And then what happens is in the middle, they meet and we have the scientist practitioner model. So the practitioner model really refers to PsyDs, or doctors in psychology. PsyDs is going to be majority of, it's going to be practical training for the majority. There's some coursework, of course, but it has a largely practical focus. They're about 4 to 5 years. Over the 4 or 5 years, it'll cost around $180,000. Now, again, it varies widely based on the program that you go at. The acceptance rate, another piece of good news, is relatively high. Again, hesitant always to provide acceptance rate percentages because it's just, it varies widely based on the programs that you apply to. And career outcomes are varied, but the majority of people who choose to do PsyDs do so because they want to become psychologists. Now, people with PsyDs can practice in a variety of settings, but if your main focus is just to practice at a research hospital, I would recommend getting a PhD and not a PsyD, and we can talk more about that later. And then just as a piece of information, you do still require licensure to practice as a psychologist, and that licensure is gonna vary state to state. So the kind of mixed model, or the research scientist, the scientist practitioner model, is the PhD in clinical psychology and school psychology and in counseling psychology. These models are basically kind of a 50-50 research training and practical training. They take a mix of both. They're about 1.5 years longer than the PsyD. However, they are fully funded. That being said, they may require you to TA during your time there. The acceptance rate is much, much lower, and the reason why that is because they're fully funded, right? So it's very attractive for students. And again, the career outcomes can vary, and there are many things that you can do with a PhD in clinical psychology, but a lot of people choose to get this degree in order to practice as a psychologist. This would open up the ability to practice also as a research scientist in academia or industry and become a professor. The last option is basically the full scientist model. These are often degrees like PhDs in experimental psychology or developmental psychology. These degrees take about 5 to 7 years. They're also fully funded. The acceptance rates vary a lot within here. Some of them are even lower than the clinical PhD. Some of them are a little bit higher. It just depends on the school. And this is really the path to follow if you want to be a research scientist. In academia, in industry, it's a path to follow if you want to become a professor. And then there are many other alternative careers that PhDs follow, things in product development, human factors engineering, and user interaction. So with that, I assume that many of you are asking yourself, well, how do I choose? How do I choose if I want a master's or if I want a doctorate? And you know now the basic differences, the acceptance rates, the costs, the timing of all of it. But I did want to iterate that a lot of the careers that you guys might be thinking of, such as practicing as a therapist, a career in research, a career in counseling, a career in social work, maybe a career in HR, all of those are things that you actually could do with either a master's or a doctoral degree. You do not need a doctoral degree to practice as a therapist. That being said, things like the ability to conduct psychological testing will require you to be licensed as a psychologist. And to talk a little bit about definitions, all psychologists are therapists, but not all therapists are psychologists. And I know that's confusing, but as a therapist, you're seeing patients one-on-one, but you don't necessarily get the title as a psychologist, right? As a psychologist, you're licensed by the state board, and you must have a doctoral degree to be a psychologist. So if you are thinking that you want to provide psychological testing, neurobehavioral testing, all of that, those would require being a psychologist, which would require a doctoral degree. The decision to do a master's or a PhD is often guided by whether you want to do research and science or whether you want to practice and see patients. If you have a PhD, you typically have a higher salary across the career lifespan, which makes sense. You went to school for a really long time and you might be in a whole lot of debt. So that being said, it's not to underemphasize the whole being in school for a really long time. Typically, if you're getting a doctoral degree, you're looking around 6 years, which can be a really, really long time to still be in school. So depending, and that's where it comes back to the importance of identifying what your career goals are before you select a graduate program. So bear with me now, there's going to be some text heavy slides, but this is mostly because I wanted you guys to have the information to kind of process after our presentation. So one of the most common questions that I get are what are the components of an application and how do I make myself competitive? So here we go. The first 4 components of an application are your GPA and GRE, your letters of recommendation, your CV, and your statement of purpose. To go one by one. I know if I don't address it now that somebody's going to ask me what the minimum GPA is and what the average GPA of programs are. Here's the thing. I gave you the statistics that are available online, but I want you to take these with a grain of salt. The averages for successful applicants varies widely year to year. And ever since the pandemic, it has varied even more. So whatever you see here could be a guide, but ultimately they're so close together that they're really not that helpful in the first place. And as far as minimums go, I don't want anyone to be scared off from that. It's true that having lower than the minimum could prevent you from applying to certain programs, but many programs actually don't use some sort of electronic cutoff and will still consider your application if you have lower than the 3.0 or 3.2 that's listed. So I'll put it there because I know someone will ask me, but I don't want anyone to make big decisions on their grad school plans based on these stats. To briefly touch on the GRE is basically like the SAT. It's not like an adult version and it's not more complicated. It's really just like the SAT. The good news about the GRE is that a lot of programs are getting rid of it. Most programs paused it during the pandemic. A lot of programs have then decided to get rid of it altogether. Some programs are unfortunately bringing it back. I can't tell you which ones of your programs have it, won't have it, will have it in a year when you apply, have it now. You have to go look at each of the programs you're thinking of to see what those GRE requirements are. Moving on to letters of recommendation, and I have a feeling we're going to talk a lot about this. But broadly, I just wanted to share this fun fact that somebody did a survey of almost 2,000 graduate program directors, and surprisingly, they indicated that letters of recommendation were the #1 most important component of the application. I also know that's something that somebody would ask me, what's the most important thing in my application? And a lot of times I'll tell you, I don't know, because admissions committee vary widely in what they prioritize. But it seems like there's a pretty large consensus that letters of recommendation are very important. So I included guides here. I recommend reading through them. I particularly like the Confessions of a Brandeis Professor because they also tell you what to avoid, which I think is really helpful. So definitely check out those resources on your free time, get a better idea of how to ask for a letter, who to ask for a letter, when to ask for a letter, all of that is included there. Academic CVs, again, something I didn't want to spend a ton of time on. We have great resources and templates. There are great external resources, and this is one of the things that I'd highly recommend you come visit us here at the Career Center so that we can discuss one-on-one the components and the content of your academic CV before you submit it. Statement of purpose, I did want to go a little bit more in depth. Again, we do have great guides on how to develop your statement of purpose. However, broadly speaking, the types of things that you're going to be asked is to cover how your passion for the field developed. This is I wanted to study psychology since I was 3 years old statement. We never want your whole statement to be that, but if you can show length and a timeline of how long you've been passionate about this field, that's a strength for you. We want to talk about your experiences. This will make the bulk of your statement. What has prepared you both academically and practically for success in this program? Why do you want to do this program? There's about 17 billion PsyD programs in the United States. Why this one? They want to make sure you research the program and that you can really speak to the fact that you are a good fit. And I know that somebody's going to ask me, what does it mean to show that I'm a good fit? So things that include showing fit are, what faculty do you want to work with? What courses do you want to take? Are there any extracurriculars like outreach programs or volunteer clinics, internships, practicum opportunities that you particularly want to engage in? Showing that your research interests, if this is a research program, fit within the school and that there are people who are studying the things that you also want to study is critically important. Because no matter how competitive of an applicant you are, if you tell a school, I want to study, you know, how birds take flight, and nobody at the school studies that, then they're not going to let you in because it's not going to be a good fit. And then lastly, we want to show endpoint, and that's where that initial kind of self-reflection is important. Why do you want this graduate degree? We really want to show them that the only way to get to your kind of dream career is through their program. And then the last, actually, it was hiding down there. So the last component is the interviews. The interviews are for doctoral programs only. Master's programs that I know of do not hold interviews. There may be exceptions to that, so don't hold me to it, but for the most part, it's for doctoral programs. Again, I have lots of information on how to prepare for interviews in later slides. So moving on to the last part of making yourself a competitive applicant, the practical experience that I mentioned is going to play such a big part in your personal statement. I like to divide it kind of in 3 different types of practical experience: the research, the clinical, and then the community volunteering experience. Now, you don't need to have all 3 to get into grad school. In fact, I'd rather you have depth in one than you have breadth in all 3. And depending on which type of program you want to apply to is going to dictate where you place your focus. If you're headed for a scientist model experimental psych PhD, you better be focusing on research. If you're headed for a PsyD, that's going to be really heavily focused on the practical aspect, place more emphasis on your clinical experience and your community volunteering. So depending on where you want to go is how you decide, what do I engage in? I also wanted to give resources on how to do these things, because it's really easy for me to say, go do research. And you're like, how? So briefly, there are lots of ways to find research opportunities in either academic labs or industry. To find a lab, I suggest that you talk to your professors. Even if you're not interested in the work that they do, if they connect you with another professor, that's your ticket in. So talk to your professors, tell them you want to get involved in research. Talk to your graduate student TAs, because if they're graduate students, they're in labs. And if they're in labs, then they can get you in. And even if, again, if they're in labs that are not the ones you want to get in, they probably have friends that are in the ones that you want to get in. So make friends with your TAs. Cold email professors. I know it's kind of scary. Come see me at the Career Center. I'll walk you through how to write an email. It's not that bad, I promise. And then check out the Real Portal. The Real Portal, a lot of professors will post their undergraduate research opportunities on that portal. Internships, I wanted to mention here because the applications are due now. So if you're considering a summer internship, go on Handshake, check out the opportunities, apply now. And then the last is kind of looking through research fellowships. The undergraduate research hub at UCSD is fantastic for those, and I would definitely check it out. Clinical experience. The APA has an undergraduate opportunities website that can help you find lots of clinical experience. Again, I want to mention the Real Portal. Lots of experiences available there as well. And then that's when the informational interviews become important. Having just the practice of doing informational interviews will give you the ability to talk with knowledge about the career that you want to go into. If you want to become a psychologist, if you want to get a PhD in clinical psychology, if you talk to students who are currently in the program, you're going to have a really good idea of what the program is looking for. So the informational interviews are a really important way just to gain information. It's also your ticket to building a network. And once you build a network, that's when the opportunities for potential shadowing or internships come up. And then the last is community volunteering, things like getting involved with nonprofits like NAMI in San Diego. San Diego County has a website with research opportunities, and then volunteering at shelters and for crisis lines, as well as our local hospitals are all options. So how to choose a graduate program. This is a complicated question and one that we get often, and it's kind of the second step. So you've chosen, you're like, I'm going to go, this is it, we're going to grad school. And now what, right? So I can give you a couple of things to start looking at. Ultimately, making a school list is not going to look like your undergraduate school list. I have so many students that come and say, okay, help me build a list of reach and target and safety schools. And it just doesn't work like that for grad school. However, there are many aspects that you can take into account when you're starting to create a list of schools that you're applying to. The first thing that I would start at is, if your school and your career goal requires a license, then your school must be accredited by that licensing agency. Do not go to a school that is not accredited, and yes, they exist. So that's your first step. If you're like, I'm going to license, I want the LPC license, go on the LPC website, get a list of the accredited programs, because that's the only way to go. Next is checking out program rankings. I don't love this one, but I have to include it. The US News and World Report, the APA, a lot of websites will have rankings of their subjective opinions on how competitive programs are. Just because a program is #1 in the US News and World Report's view doesn't mean it's #1 in yours. So take those with a grain of salt. And the rankings don't even provide you with any idea of whether you're competitive for that program or not. So it can get you started, it can give you a list of programs, but don't let that be the end of your search. Talk to faculty and students that are in the field. You're talking to your professors anyways, because you're looking for experiences and you need those letters of recommendation. Ask them about, where do they recommend? You know, tell them, I want to study this, where do I go? Or I'm looking to stay in Southern California. Do you have recommendations for PsyD programs? Ask your professors and talk to your grad student TAs. And then look for admission statistics. The APA actually has, lucky for you guys, this doesn't exist that I know of for any other field, but the APA has a database that basically tells you the acceptance rate, mean GPA, mean GRE score of any accredited program in the United States and Canada, I believe. The link to that is in this PowerPoint, and I'll point it out later. It is a paid database that UCSD does not have access to, but it doesn't cost very much. So what I always recommend students do is that when they're ready to create their final list, they just pay the 1-month subscription fee, they get access to the database, make their final decisions on their school list, and then that's it. I probably shouldn't say this, but you can share your login info. So if there's a group of you applying, just go in together and it'll be worth it, I promise. Next things to consider are kind of like specifically in the program. This is a step later. Who are the faculty that are there? Like I said, if you're doing research, you want to demonstrate fit with the faculty. Are there any extracurriculars, things like TA opportunities if you want to be teaching, clinics that you particularly want to be involved in? If you're doing, specifically if you're doing a master's program, look at the curriculum. A lot of your time is going to be spent taking courses, and it's going to be really important to check out that course curriculum and make sure that the classes that are offered are a good fit for what you want to learn. And then lastly is the opportunities, right? Are there labs you want to work in? Are there internships? Do they have partnerships? If you go in here and you say, I particularly want to work with the veteran population, do they have an association with the VA? Things like that are things you want to think about to decide where to go. And then the last is consider feasibility and future goals. And I did go through this. It's not in order of importance, by the way. This is all to be considered together. The financials, big one, really big one. How much is this going to cost, and is that worth it to you? The location. People get so bogged down in applying to places that they don't actually think of whether they want to go. It's great that Minnesota is a fantastic school, and no offense to anyone from Minnesota, but will you go if you get in? Really think about it. Will you go? Don't apply anywhere that, no matter how great the program is, there's no way you're going because you have family restrictions, you want to be closer to, your hometown, whatever it is. Look at the alumni. Do they go on to do the things that you want to do? If you want to go on to being a professor, how many of the PhD students are going on to do that? Things like that. Make sure that the profiles of the alumni match the ones that you want. And then the last is opportunities for career development. Do they have support for that within the program? Are they going to help you find a job when you get out? Okay, so moving on, I'm not going to read this out to you because that's a lot, but I wanted to point out that the UCSD psychology program has really phenomenal resources, and they're linked all throughout this PowerPoint. This is more information on how to choose a graduate program. They have 4 steps for choosing that. They have information on how to contact potential faculty mentors, which I know is a question that a lot of students have. The famous "how many programs should I apply to" question, they give you an answer. If you were to come to me, I wouldn't have given you one. So here's their answer for it. I think that first sentence summarizes it really nicely, and that it varies really widely based on the individual. If you're an incredibly strong applicant, your application list can be shorter. If you're maybe not, all the way up there, and you tell me that you're applying to, Harvard, Stanford, and MIT, I might suggest that you pick some other ones. So in general, you apply to the more selective programs are, the more you apply to. That being said, applications cost money and they take a lot of time. So making a list of 50 programs you're going to apply to is not a good idea either. This little sheet, I wanted to include it in here because I kind of like it. I don't recommend following it exactly to a T, but as a general kind of way to organize your thoughts when you're graduate program shopping, as the APA called it, I really like this. This gives you, each column would be different schools that you're thinking of applying, and these are all things that I've talked about, right? Looking at the acceptance rate and the profile of the admitted applicants, looking at accreditation status. Am I a good match to the culture of the program, assign a grade? That's one that I'd maybe leave out because I'm not entirely sure how anyone would do that. But something that could replace that is, maybe can I talk to a student who's currently in the program and ask them about their experience? And that can give you information on culture and fit. And then things like, how many years does it take them to graduate? What percentage of their grads are getting licensed? This would be an important one if you're, again, if your endpoint is getting licensure. Okay, now we're going to get into questions. These are some of mine. These are the top 3 questions that I get as a graduate advisor that I wanted to address off the bat. When should I start doing research, volunteering, looking into grad school, writing my statements? The earlier the better, but it's never too late. Here's my explanation. I don't know how long it's going to take you to write your personal statement. I have no idea. Maybe you're one of those people that's like, I just drink a Red Bull and I write it in one night. Maybe you're one of those people that's like, I want you to look at it 17 times before I submit. I don't know. So whichever person you are, that's what's going to dictate when you should start your application. I have so many students that come in their senior year and say, I haven't thought about any of this. I don't, like, maybe I'm going, maybe I'm not going. I haven't done anything. What do I do? It's not too late. You don't have to have thought about this years before you go. Many students, if they are, just starting to contemplate the idea of grad school in their senior year, choose to take gap years in between. And that's another really popular subject, is gap years. Yes, it's good to take gap years. No, you don't have to, but it's an opportunity for you to make yourself more competitive and gain more experience if you didn't do that during undergraduate. Next, how do I know which programs I'm competitive for? I would love to tell you, I don't know. The good news is that the APA has that paid database I mentioned, and that link is right here. So that's at least going to give you the admission stats for programs, which would include things like acceptance rate, GPA, GRE, things like that. But keep in mind that the application review is holistic. Your GPA and your GRE are not, by far, not the only things that are going to determine your acceptance. In fact, when they polled those admissions committee directors, GPA and GRE was pretty far down the list. So yes, it can be a starting point, but again, I wouldn't let it completely dictate which programs you choose to apply to. The best way to find out if you're a good match for a program is to talk to students who are currently in that program. Okay, and then last one, how much research practical experience do I need? Depends on what you're applying to. If you're applying to a research intensive program, whether that be master's or PhD, then you're going to want some more research experience. And no, I can't put a number of months to it. If you want a PhD, it's going to require more research experience than a master's. Again, the best way to find out how much research experience, for example, PhDs in experimental psych have, is to talk to current PhDs in experimental psych, find out what their experience was like getting into the program. So with that, I received many questions from your group, and they do span 4 slides, and I will not be making you all suffer by reading them out to you. I wanted you guys to have the answer with the slides after, and I'll focus on just one question per slide right now to discuss, and then I'm going to open it up at the end and we can go back and really get into any of these specific questions. I have to start by saying that the answers reflect my experience as an advisor and admissions committee member, but they don't necessarily reflect the position of admissions committees across UCSD or any other university. So please don't go tell anyone like Alicia told me that I'd get in if I did this. This is my personal experience, and I cannot speak for the admissions committees of programs anywhere. With that being said, out of these questions, I really wanted to talk about, do I need a master's degree before applying to doctoral program in psychology? Because I feel like that's a popular one. So no, you do not need a master's degree before applying to doctoral programs, whether that's a PsyD or a PhD. However, it is an opportunity to make your application stronger. There are some programs that will group the master's and the doctoral degree, whether that's a PsyD or a PhD, together, and that can be a good option for you to kind of shorten your time. Either way, what's really important is that you have practical experience, research, clinical, whatever it is. So if that means taking gap years to get the experience, or getting a master's to get the experience, most of the time that's really up to you and financially what your position is. If you're working, you're not going into debt. If you're doing a master's degree, it's going to cost you. So that's kind of my spiel on the master's before the doctorate. Okay, so now questions that have to do with choosing a graduate program. I wanted to talk about what kind of graduate program should I apply to if I want to practice as a therapist, because I also feel like that's a really popular one. I did touch on it a little bit earlier. There are really 3 options if you want to be a therapist: a master's degree plus a certification. They all require certifications, by the way, just to get to the end of that. Master's degree plus certification, PsyD plus certification, or clinical psychology PhD plus certification. The doctoral degrees, the PsyD, clinical PhD, allow you to practice as psychologists. The master's degree plus a certification like licensed professional counselor, licensed marriage and family therapist, licensed clinical social worker, allow you to practice as a therapist and in independent practice if you'd like to. But you are not a psychologist. So your choice of which to go with should be determined by the patient population you want to work with and the work environment you want to be in. Like I said, if you want to work at a research hospital, for example, UCSD Health, you want to work in their inpatient or even outpatient psychiatry department as a psychologist, a PhD is going to be your best bet for that. If you want to work in private practice and you don't particularly have the need to have the authority to do psychological evaluations, you just are really passionate about, practicing as a therapist, a master's degree and a license is perfectly acceptable for that. Okay, here, application process. I think I'm going to hit the who should I ask for letters, because that's a big one. The bottom line is that you should ask the people who are going to write you the strongest letter. And that's because, like I said, the letters of recommendation are hugely important. And a lot of students will kind of neglect them until the end, and then it's sad and scary. So if there's anything you take away today, it's that you should garner relationships with your letter writers as soon as you can and as much as you can. The people who write your letters, ideally, now this is not a requirement, but ideally would have the degree that you're applying for. So if you are applying for a PhD, ideally your letter writers will have a PhD. If you're applying for a master's, your letter writers can either have a master's or a PhD. The reason why that is because ideally your letter writers will say some things like, this person is uniquely prepared for a successful journey in the PsyD program. And if they didn't go through a PsyD program, that just doesn't, that doesn't sound great. So that is why I would recommend that. People to ask, examples of people to ask are professors you took courses with. Ideally multiple, but if it was one and you had a great relationship, that's fine. Professors you were an instructional assistant for. The PI in your current research lab, not the grad student, not the postdoc, not anyone else, but the PI. It's okay. What will likely happen is that your grad student or postdoc mentor will write the letter and your PI will just sign it. It just has to come from your PI. And then your supervisor at any kind of volunteer position, job, internship, anything. Those are good people to write your letters. Okay, last slide, last question that I'm going to go through, and then I'm going to open it up. Let's talk about research experience. How important is research experience, and what do I do if I don't have any? So the importance of research experience is going to depend on the program you're applying to. Like I said, if you're applying to a research intensive program, it's going to become more important to get research experience. What do I do if I don't have much? If you're an undergraduate and you are a third year or below, come talk to me and we will find you research experience. If you're nearing the end of your undergraduate time and you're like, yeah, I have like 3 months left, I don't have any research experience, what do I do? That's when the gap years come in. Taking gap years and working as a research technician or clinical trial coordinator can get you the research experience that you need to be a successful applicant. So that's my take on that. With that, here's a horrible slide with all of the resources that were linked throughout this presentation. I guarantee you the answers to your questions are somewhere in there, but if you don't feel like pulling through them, then again, come see me at the Career Center. If you have more questions, the first thing I would recommend is checking out our website. We have lots of resources on there. The second, and I've mentioned this many times, come see us. We'd love to meet with you. Marcy Morrison and I are the pre-grad advisors here at UCSD. We do one-on-one appointments, and you can book us through Handshake. And then the last thing I want to talk about is we have an upcoming event on Wednesday, November 2nd from 4 to 5 p.m. where we're going to have students from a wide variety of graduate programs, including PhD students in clinical psychology, who are going to attend, and we're going to put them in breakout rooms and you can ask them all of the very extremely specific program questions that you have. So I highly recommend that you attend that if you have questions that are really specific to certain psychology programs. With that, thank you for holding your attention through that and holding your questions. I want to open it up. We can go back to any questions that you saw on the slides that I didn't get to talk about. If you have a new question, either unmute yourself and speak up or go ahead and raise your hand and I will call on you.
So really quick, Alicia, there were a couple questions that came up in the chat. And one of them is, how important is it building your LinkedIn? And even if you don't have really anything to put on there right now.
Yes. Okay. So the LinkedIn is important to do informational interviewing, and informational interviewing is pretty much just always important. So I would recommend making a LinkedIn. Two good pieces of news. The Career Center has LinkedIn specific appointments where if you don't feel like you want to tackle it by yourself, you can just meet with an advisor and they'll tackle it with you. I know you might feel like you don't have anything to put on there, but I guarantee you didn't get into UCSD if you had nothing to put on a LinkedIn. So whatever you're thinking that you don't have, come see an advisor and we'll help you kind of pull out those experiences that you can talk about, even if you're really early on in your undergraduate career. I would recommend making a LinkedIn. No one from the admissions committee is going to go look for it. That's not why. It's to use to create a network, and it's never too early to do that.
And then another question that was asked is kind of, where is the Career Center located? And is there any way that you could also provide us with your email address?
Yes. Okay. So the Career Center is, it's really close to student health, kind of right across from the Target. Feel free to stop by. When I meant stop by, I do mean virtually. Unfortunately, most of us either work partially or completely from home, like myself. So if you want to meet with an advisor, go ahead and go through Handshake and create an appointment that way. The way that you can find a graduate specific appointment is you go to Handshake and you click on undergraduate career advising, unless you're a master's student, and then talk to me after. In undergraduate career advising, you'll see grad school preparation, either STEM or non-STEM. My psychology students, you guys basically straddle both, so it doesn't matter which one you choose. And then there you'll have the appointment availabilities, and you can book yourself in. They'll always be virtual appointments. As far as my email address, I unfortunately cannot, I would love to speak to every single one of you, but if I share it here and I shared it at every event, I would have 200 emails in my inbox every morning. So if you'd like to speak more about anything that I talked about, go ahead and go on Handshake and make an appointment with me. I'd love to meet with you one-on-one that way.
And then another question that came up is, can PsyD perform neurobehavioral or psychometric tests, or is that just PhD?
Okay, so my first initial gut reaction says yes. However, that is one of those really specific things that I would actually ask a PsyD. I do not have a PsyD, and so I don't want to promise anything. I think yes, but another great reason to reach out to a PsyD and talk to them and ask them that question.
And
okay,
then
looks like we're just going with the chat at this point. So Morgan, sorry, Amber, if you want to keep just reading them out to me, I'll go ahead and do that.
Yeah, so the next one said, my end goal is to be a therapist that specializes in working with queer youth, BIPOC youth and families, first-gen Americans. Would a master's or a PsyD be better? If master's, which license?
Okay, so both master's and PsyD would allow you to work in that field with that patient population. It depends on the type of work that you want to do, on whether or not you need the PsyD. It also depends on the salary that you want and how much you're willing to pay for school, right? So those are always, pay way more for school, you'd make a little more paying as a psychologist. Which licenses? So if you're doing a master's, any of the licenses that I mentioned, I'd probably go for LPC or licensed clinical social worker, the two that kind of come up as far as a master's degree licensure. A marriage and family therapist licensure would also be fine though. So really any of the licenses I mentioned would be appropriate for master's. For doctorate, there's really just one license. It's the EPPP, I think, and that allows you to practice as a psychologist. So I know that wasn't an answer to your question, but I would encourage you to think about, you know, the cost of the degree and the time to get the degree and how much that's worth to you.
And then a question that I had personally is there such a thing as being too personal in your grad statement?
Yes. Okay. So there is always a professional way to discuss any personal experience. So in that sense, no. I would really encourage you to come see us again to talk about your specific case, and anybody who has that case who's kind of struggling to discuss these maybe sensitive things in a professional manner. And I always want to iterate that regardless of how often somebody asks you for your hardships or diversity experiences, things like that, what you reveal is entirely up to you, and the way that you reveal it is up to you. We're just here to help guide you in how you want to tell your own story. And on that note, telling your own story is, you do need to do that. It's just up to you on which part of your story you want to share.
And then another one that came up is some colleges offer graduate certificate programs. How are they different from master's programs?
So the graduate certificate programs are going to be much shorter. The admissions process is usually more or less non-existent. Like, anyone can do a certificate program if they'll pay for it. Graduate certificate programs, aside from the applied behavioral analysis, which is kind of its own world, aside from that, none of those would qualify you for licensure as for any of the licenses that I mentioned. So it can help you as a career advancement move, but it won't be sufficient to get licensed to practice as a therapist, for example.
Okay, it looks like we have just enough time for maybe a few more questions, so I'm going to try and address as many as possible in the chat. So the next one says, if I was interested in research, how could I pursue careers related to that with a PsyD or master's?
If you were interested in research, I would, first of all, not get a PsyD at all. Don't do that. If you want to do research, do not get a PsyD. If you want to do research, either get a master's degree or get a PhD. Specifically, I would say well, I guess it depends what kind of research you want to do. If you want to do research on patient populations and still have kind of a treatment patient-centered focus, I would do a clinical psychology PhD. If you're really you want to study human behavior, you want to study cognition, memory, things like that, experimental psych is going to be the way for you to go. The master's correlates of what I just said basically stand true: master's in clinical psychology, master's in experimental psychology. A PhD will open a lot more doors in the research fields. That being said, the number of positions available to people with masters at the master's level in research are really quickly expanding. So either way could be a good way, and this would be a great time to go do some informational interviewing to talk to people who maybe are in the research field who have a master's versus those who have a PhD, and kind of compare what their positions are like.
And then the next one asks, is it best to attend the tackling the personal statement for pre-health applications if you want to do a psychology related career, or does it depend on what degree you're trying to pursue?
So pre-health is not going to cover any psychology related programs. So I would not recommend that one. I would recommend attending the Getting Your Grad School Application Ready event on November 2nd that I shared, or meeting with a pre-grad advisor. So all psychology programs are going to fall under pre-grad and not pre-health, unless you are med school bound, PA bound, nursing school bound, all of those things. In that case, do attend the pre-health.
And then the next one asks, when you mentioned taking a gap year if you didn't get enough research experience during undergrad, what were the jobs you mentioned that would help?
Yeah, so the jobs that I mentioned are things like a research technician or clinical trial coordinator. Now, those are just job positions that can help get your search started. I'm not saying those are the only two positions that you should take if you want to go to grad school. There are many options. But technically speaking, these are positions that often are kind of a path onto graduate school, and they're open to people with undergraduate degrees. So those are the two that I would start on, but not the only ones that are available. Let's go ahead and do one more question, and then I just want to have the time to upload that presentation for you guys.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So the last question is, if I want to be a marriage and family therapist with just a master's and license, should I do research at all during undergrad, or should I focus on clinical work and volunteering?
Good question. Doing research is never going to be to your detriment. It's always going to, it can always serve you well. That being said, if it means that you don't have time to really get in depth into either clinical work or volunteering, I would prioritize the clinical work and volunteering for this particular degree, because it's a practical degree, not a research-based degree. So with that, thank you so much, Amber, for all those questions. I know we didn't get to all of your questions. I hope that having the presentation, which I'm going to go ahead and upload right now, will help you guys, and that way you can have